It's really important to pick the right land surveyor for your project. If you're involved in a real estate transaction as an investor, buyer, or a seller, or you're going to do land development, it's really important to have the right land surveyor working on your project. That's something that a lot of clients don't give a lot of time to, but I think that's a mistake. It's really important to take some time to think about who the right surveyor is for your needs as a client and what type of survey firm is going to be best suited to meet your needs. So in this video, I want to talk about the three sizes of typical sizes of land surveying firms and why choosing the right size land surveying firm or company is going to make you more satisfied as a client. You know, matching up your needs and your project with the right size surveyor is important, and it's going to get you better results. And certainly the size of the company is not the only thing that matters, or not the most important things, maybe not even the most important thing about a surveying company. But it is important, and the different sizes of the company, those changes in size have an impact on the way the company operates and the kind of client service that you're going to get. And a lot of people outside of the surveying and engineering industry don't understand some of those dynamics and some of the aspects that make a small company different from a large company, for example. So I wanted to put together a video that explains some of those differences. So what I want to do in this video is I want to talk about the kind of three typical sizes that you find in the surveying industry, size of companies, and what some of the differences are in those different kinds of companies. So, and just to make it easier to understand, here's the categories that I use. So the first type of company, the smallest kind, I call Minnows. The second type, kind of medium-sized surveying company, I call barracudas. And then the third size, the largest size companies, I call whales. That just helps paint the mental picture that I'm trying to convey, and it's a little bit humorous, obviously. So let's talk about those three different kinds of companies and sizes of company and what makes them different. So I'm going to start with Minnows. So Minnows are 1 to 2 person surveying companies, and there's a lot of them. In fact, I haven't done the actual research on this, but they might even make up the majority of licensed surveyors in private practice. So the majority of those guys are going to be small firms. And most Minnows, so most 1 or 2 person firms, are probably not going to be a good fit for a lot of private projects that aren't residential. And I'll explain that. I'll explain what I mean by that. So Minnows are a good fit for lot surveys. So if you're just a homeowner and you want to build a fence or move a fence, Minnows are a good fit for you for some different reasons. We'll get into that. But if you're doing anything else, if you're doing any kind of land development or commercial real estate, ag, industrial, large recreational properties, outdoor properties, Minnows probably not going to be a good fit. So let's talk about why that is. What are some characteristics of Minnows? So like I said, they're 1 to 2 people. Usually it's a licensed surveyor and they've got a part-time helper. Sometimes that person, the helper, might be helping them in the field as a rodman, what we call a rodman, or they might be doing a little bit of drafting, but it's basically the licensed surveyor. He's operating on his own. And frequently what I find is these OneMan shops are, a lot of times they're retired government surveyors, so somebody that retires from a Department of Transportation or a city. So they've got a regular pension and they've got a health insurance being provided, and they're just doing really, really cheap surveys for a little bit extra money. Now there are exceptions to that rule. I know a couple one-man surveying companies that actually try and run legitimate businesses, that carry professional liability insurance and business insurance, and they have a website and a phone number that you can actually call. So there are exceptions to that rule, but a lot of these one-man shops are basically retired guys, and they're not even really running a real business. So There's some good things, some advantages to that if you're a homeowner, and of course there's some disadvantages to that. So typically these guys, they do one thing, most of them, and most of the time it's like they just do construction surveying or they just do lot surveys. So they're they're a one song band, one hit wonder. A lot of times they don't carry insurance. They don't have professional liability insurance, and they don't carry business insurance. So they're leaving the client somewhat unprotected there if there's a mistake or a problem. Most of them aren't running modern equipment and software. They're just not making enough money to make that investment. And because they're so limited in what they can do, it doesn't really, even if they have the money, the investment doesn't make sense. So, a lot of these guys are driving old beat up pickup trucks, and, they're using a piece of equipment that's 40 years old or 30 years old. And so what do? They're substituting basically cheap labor for advanced technology in a lot of cases. And, that limits their ability to offer, innovative approaches to get the work done. It's basically they can do their one or two things and that's it. If that doesn't solve your problem, then they can't help you. But the good news is they're inexpensive. They're cheap. If you can wait for a survey, if you're a homeowner and you can wait 3 months to get your lot surveyed and your corners set, that might be a good fit. They usually carry a pretty long backlog, heavy backlog. Most one-man shops I know are a month out or 2 months out, just because their prices are so low. And most of their clients don't mind. They can wait. They've always got a backlog. Most of the relationships that those surveyors have with their clients are what I call transactional relationships. So they don't have a long-term relationship with the client. Usually they work for the client one time. They're never going to see that client again. And so that changes the dynamic a little bit between consultant and client. It shouldn't, but it does. That surveyor has doesn't have as much skin in the game as he would if he had a long-term relationship with a client. And I'd like to talk some more about transactional relationships in surveying versus long-term relationships, and part of the reason why I'm not in the lot survey business. But I won't do that in that video. So that's kind of the first category, minnows. Not a bad fit if you just need to put up a fence and you can wait a while. You're mostly interested in low price, then a minnow might be a good fit for you. So the second category of firm size that I use, surveying company size, is barracudas. So barracuda is a predatory fish. They're kind of lean and mean and fast, and so in my mind, those firms are somewhere between 2 and 25 people. Typically, they usually, unlike a one-man shop, they're offering a bundle of related services to the client. They don't do everything, but they've kind of focused on a core group of services. Maybe it's a half a dozen things or a dozen things that they can do for a client. They operate like a real business. These guys, almost always, if you're dealing with the barracuda, they've got professional liability insurance, they've got business insurance, they've got a website, they've got a business phone number. You can call and get a hold of them. They're going to send you an invoice on a company letterhead. They're going to prepare a good work product. So these guys, they're trying to run an actual legitimate business. They're paying taxes, they're paying payroll taxes. Employees have health insurance and they're paying workman's comp, all that stuff. They're able, because they charge a little more than the minnows, they're able to make some modest investments in technology. So, they may not have the newest gear, but they've got modern equipment and software, and so that allows them to realize some productivity gains, and it also gives them the ability to, offer some different solutions. So, for example, my company, we fly UAVs. That gives us an opportunity, in some cases we can offer that service to a client as an alternative to some more traditional surveying services or even traditional aerial mapping. That's just one example. And usually barracudas have low overhead, so they're not carrying a bunch of overhead costs. My firm, our overhead costs are under $3,000 a month, so very low. That's not counting health insurance and other employee benefits, but just non-employee related expenses, our office rent, our utilities, our software rentals. We're between $2,000 and $3,000 a month, and that's for 4 or 5 people. That's a very modest overhead rate. It pales in comparison to the overrate of some larger firms. So we pass that savings on to the client, and we're proud of being able to do that. Most Most barracudas can handle medium-sized project. So, our company, we could handle, small land subdivisions. We could handle, development of a small retail center or a light industrial parcel. We're not doing huge projects. We're not doing 1,200 unit subdivisions or building any stadiums. So, small to mid-sized projects. Minnows are going to have a hard time, doing something like a shopping center. They're just going to struggle to have the bandwidth there and to have the breadth of services that you're going to need to build a slightly more complicated project. The other thing that's really different between minnows and barracudas is, most of the time, barracuda is going to have some ongoing relationships with their clients. Those relationships are going to be more long-term, not transactional like with a minnow. So as a general rule, that means that the land surveyor's got some more skin in the game. He wants to keep those clients happy, wants to keep them coming back, and he's going to be taking good care of them. And I think that's true. Most of the clients of our company, Redefined Horizons, are repeat clients, probably 90%. So these are people that we're working for over and over again on different projects in Central California. And, we become friends with those people and we develop relationships with them. There's some loyalty there that gets developed, and we want to take good care of those people. We want them to be happy with our work. So as a general rule, I think, if you're not just a homeowner looking for a one-time survey, but if you're looking for a long-term investment in a relationship with a good surveyor, barracudas are a good fit. All right, so the third category of surveying company size is what I call whales. So these are the big guys. So typically I categorize that as it could be anywhere from 25 to 10,000 people. Some of these firms are huge. They're multi-state or even international firms. And there's big names. I won't name them, but if you're in the industry, you know who I'm talking about. And so there's some good reasons to hire a whale. These guys just have every service under the sun that you can think of. It's like an encyclopedia of land development services, right? They've got the structural engineer and the landscape architect, and they've got the civil engineer, and they've got the public relations consultant, and they've just got everything under one roof. And so that makes things easier on complex projects. You have a single point of contact. So they can do a lot of different things. Again, these guys are real businesses. They're carrying insurance. They got an office. They have a phone number. They're going to send you an invoice that looks like an invoice. They can handle large and complicated projects. So, what I'll tell clients is, we're a barracuda-sized company, Redefined Horizons, and if you're trying to build a stadium in downtown Oakland, that we're probably not a good fit. And it's a really complicated project with a lot of moving pieces. It requires a multi-disciplined team. It's way beyond what my team could probably handle. So, if you're building big projects like that, then whales are a good fit. And a lot of whales focus exclusively on that type of work because they know they're a good fit for that type of work. Now, there's some disadvantages to working with a whale. So let's talk about some of those. If you're a client that tends to have smaller projects, what do I mean by small? Let's say $100,000 or less. You may find that you don't get great service from a whale because you're just not going to be that important. You're not going to be on their radar. And I know the big firms will tell you, even the little guys are important, but it's just hard to do in practice. I've worked at big firms. I can tell you when you're in the room deciding where resources are going to go, that $5 million project is going to get the resources, not the $25,000 project. And so if you have small projects as a client, whales could be a challenge. Having to be responsive and getting good service can be a challenge. I had a land developer on a small project I was working on in the Bay Area call me. He was frustrated. He couldn't get a hold of anybody at the company. He couldn't get a hold of any of the civil engineers. He couldn't get a hold of the executive managers, the principals of the firm. And I finally called him back, and he was highly upset. He had a project that was behind schedule, and he couldn't get a status update on our work. And he told me, he said, Landon, you're the only person on this project I can get to call me back. He said, this is really disappointing. And so that's a real life story, not making that up. So those are some of the challenges you can have when you work with a big firm, when you work with a whale. When you're working with a whale, small clients, you might not get to deal with the decision maker all the time. The nice thing about working with a barracuda is you're going to have some one-on-one interaction, more than likely, with the licensed surveyor that's handling your project. So, for example, at my company, Redefined Horizons, you call our office. There's a good chance I'm going to pick up the phone You're going to have my cell phone number. You'll be able to shoot me a text if you need to, or shoot me an email. You start working with whales, and you might get pushed down to some junior level staff. I know that in the past I've worked at bigger firms, and even before I was licensed, I was having to deal with clients on a regular basis because the executive managers, the licensed professionals didn't have time; they were too busy. Some other challenges with whales. They tend to be a little more bureaucratic and slow moving, so they might not be super responsive. They may not move very fast. They're generally not what we consider flexible. So those are some other challenges. There's some big firms I've worked at where it took 3 corporate approvals and 3 forms to get to buy a sledgehammer. In fact, some places I worked, I would go buy, if the equipment or tool cost less than $300, I would just go buy it myself because it was faster and cheaper than trying to get through the corporate decision making structure, which is, that's ridiculous. So if you're dealing with a whale, you may be fighting some of those problems even if you can't see them, even if they're not exposed to you as a client. And then the big problem with a lot of whales is they're really expensive. So you're paying for a lot of luxuries. You're paying for a lot of corporate overhead. You may be paying for some complexity that you don't need. If you have a small to medium sized project, you're going to be paying in the hourly rates of that big firm. You're going to be paying for that complexity and some of those capabilities that you just don't need. And they may try and tell you that you're not, but you are. As a general rule, those guys don't have 2 different rate schedules. One for big clients and one for small clients. You're paying the same rate schedule as the big client. I think back on some of the big firms that I've worked for in the past. These are firms that have, beautiful offices in urban downtowns where the rent is outrageous. One company I worked at, they had a $30,000 bar tab for their end of the year party. Another company I worked at, our regular business meetings, bi-monthly business meetings were, at the country club, and, that they were passing around, $200 bottles of wine, at the lunch meeting. So, if you hire a big firm as a smaller client, you're paying for some of that, whether you want to or not. And so that's, one of the nice things about working with a barracuda is you're probably not paying for some of those luxuries. One of the things Danny and I take pride in is we live simple. We try to live modest lives. We live right here in Central California. We don't have a fancy office. We don't live in mansions. So we're humble working class people, and a lot of our clients are also humble working class people, especially here in the Central Valley. We're working with small business owners or farmers or just real estate brokers, and those are people their kids are in public school, and so we take pride in the fact that we're not making our clients pay for a bunch of luxuries. And depending on the large firm that you're working with, you may be doing that. You may be paying for some things that you would rather not pay for. So that's kind of a basic breakdown of the 3 different sizes of firms. And of course, those are just, those are loose categories. You could have a 10-person firm that acts like a minnow, or a 20-person firm that acts like a whale. You could have a 50-person firm that acts like a barracuda. But those just give you a general idea of the different size firms. So here's what I would encourage you to do. Think about what size surveying company is going to best fit your needs. If you're just a homeowner and you just need a fence put up, you should probably work with a minnow. If you've got a smaller project, a retail center, or a light industrial project, or maybe you're, buying or selling some farmland, you're doing a mixed use project, on a few acres, and you're probably a good fit, probably is barracuda. You probably don't need to pay for the waste and luxuries that come with a whale. If you're building a stadium, or you're designing Apple's next corporate headquarters, then you probably need to be working with a whale. You're not going to mind paying those additional overhead costs, and you're going to, even if you are paying, you're paying those extra costs, you're getting the benefit of that highly diverse team that can tackle really complicated, huge projects. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to do some more videos. I'm going to talk some more about transactional relationships versus long-term relationships in the real estate industry, why we don't do lot surveys. And I'm going to talk about, what do land surveyors do and why might you need one? if you're in the real estate business. And then we're going to talk about 5 questions that you should ask when you're trying to choose the right size surveyor. So, and I'll make sure I link to that video in particular. I'll make sure I link to the comments here. And I actually wrote an article. I've got an article. It's a few pages that talks about how to choose the right size surveyor based on your project needs. And so we'll put a link to that article online, and as a PDF too. We'll link to that in the comments to the video on YouTube.